Elara arrived at the gates of Nazareth Asylum with nothing but a torn wool coat and a folded letter from a priest she barely remembered, the kind of letter that doesn't ask questions, just delivers warnings, wrapped in scripture and silence. The asylum looked less like a place of God and more like a black tooth rising from the earth. Jagged stone, slick with rain, windows too narrow for light or escape, and a bell tower that leaned, just slightly, like it was listening. The iron gate groaned open on its own. No one greeted her. Fog licked her boots and curled up the stone steps. The front door opened before she could knock. Mother Superior was waiting. Tall, thin, unmoving. A figure carved from devotion and discipline, her habit white as bone, her eyes flat, dark, polished by years of obedience. "There is no idleness at Nazareth, child," she said. "Your hands will serve the Lord. Your mouth will remain shut. Your soul will be kept pure through silence." The halls inside were too narrow, the candles too dim. The air smelled of beeswax, mildew, and something else beneath it all, something iron, something old. The orphans didn't smile. They didn't look up. They moved like smoke, pale and obedient, eyes to the floor, words swallowed before they could form. Dinner was a ritual of silence, a bowl of gray gruel, a prayer that never reached heaven. That night, her first in the dormitory, Elara couldn't sleep. The mattress was straw. The sheets smelled of vinegar and thyme. The wind rattled the shutters. But it wasn't the wind that kept her awake. It was the sound, a low, rhythmic scraping from somewhere beneath the floorboards. Not a pipe, not an animal, something else, something ancient, dragging itself through the bones of the building. And then came the whisper, wet, thick, inhuman. It slithered through the cracks and curled beneath her bed like a breath too close to her ear. Elara 10 earned to the girl beside her, the only one who'd looked at her that day. But the girl didn't speak. She raised a single trembling finger to her lips and shook her head. Whatever lived beneath Nazareth had always been there, and no one dared name it. At Nazareth Asylum, the bell was everything. It rang before the sun. It rang before dreams could end. It meant rise, kneel, pray, survive. The girls would kneel for hours on the chapel's cold stone floor, their knees bruised, their lips cracked, their prayers desperate. This wasn't worship, it was containment. It was fear shaped into ritual. The nuns led every prayer like they were begging, not for salvation, but for mercy, not from God, but from something else entirely. The rules were carved into the walls of the dormitory. 3 lines in red paint, no talking after the evening bell, never enter the West Wing, and never, ever, miss the penance. The West Wing was chained shut, its windows boarded, salt poured thick across the threshold. Even the rats didn't go near it. Every night after dinner, the girls were sent to their beds. The nuns filed into the chapel, locking the doors behind them. Then it would begin. The chants started low, like humming, then rose, louder and louder, until they echoed through the entire asylum, and beneath the chanting came the scraping, faster now, clawing, frantic, hungry. Elara lay in her bed, eyes wide, hands clenched. She heard it every night. So did the others, but none of them moved, none of them breathed too loudly. And then came the whispers again, this time not from the floorboards, from inside the walls, inside the air. Calling her name, Elara whispered to the older girl in the next bed, Maeve, her voice trembling. "What is it? What lives beneath us?" Maeve didn't answer right away. She waited until the chants stopped, until the whispers retreated. Then she leaned close, eyes wide with something deeper than fear. They call it the penitent. She said, "It's not a ghost. It's not a demon. It's something older than both. The nuns don't protect us from it. They protect the world from us, because we sleep above it. And if you're pure, if you're Sue. At Nazareth, curiosity was the most dangerous sin. Elara tried to fight it, tried to kneel, obey, stay invisible. But the questions grew louder than the chants. She started watching. Not the girls, not the halls, but the nuns. They were exhausted. Every morning their faces looked more sunken. Their hands trembled as they held the rosary. Their eyes darted to the shadows, like something was watching them back. And every day, after the penance, fresh salt lines appeared at the base of every door, not sprinkled, poured thick like they were sealing a wound. But the thing that chilled her most was the chapel floor. There was a place in the center of the stone where the Mother Superior always stood during prayer, a spot with no markings, no cracks, no decoration, just smooth, clean, worn like something old pressed against it every night. One stormy afternoon, thunder rolling like judgment, Elara was left alone to polish the chapel's silver. The storm masked her footsteps. The wind rattled the windows, hiding the sound of her breath. She crossed the room slowly, kneeling at that unmarked spot. She ran her fingers over the stone, searching. Then she found it. A faint line, a shift in the edge, one stone just slightly loose. Her heart pounded like a second storm. She pried it up, slowly. Carefully, it didn't reveal dirt. It revealed darkness, a space beneath the floor, and from it rose a smell that turned her stomach. Not mold, not rot, something older, something unnatural. She lowered a stolen candle into the opening. Its flickering light caught the edge of something resting on the top step, a book, leather cracked, bound by hand. She pulled it out, trembling. It was a journal. The ink faded but frantic. Every word written like a prayer, etched in panic. Sister Agnes. That was the name, and her story wasn't about saving orphans. It was about feeding something that could never be full. The journal shook in Elara's hands, each page written with urgency, with fear, with the weight of centuries. It began with a confession: Nazareth Asylum was never meant to be an orphanage. It was built over something ancient, something summoned, something left unfinished. The founding sisters were part of a heretical cult. They believed they could summon a divine presence. But what answered wasn't divine. It called itself the penitent. It fed on purity, fed on prayer, fed on the light in children who hadn't yet been broken. The nuns had tried to destroy it. They couldn't. So they caged it beneath the floor and built the asylum on top. They turned their lives into ritual, not worship, but containment. And every generation of nuns was trained to keep the same routine, to chant the same words, to offer the same protections. But it was growing stronger, smarter. It had learned to reach through the floor. It had learned to listen. The journal pages grew more frantic, the handwriting less legible. The last few entries were almost carved into the paper. The entity has learned. It read, it senses the pure. It calls to them in dreams. It marks them, wants them, demands them. The penance is no longer enough. The salt no longer holds. It needs something more, a key, a soul of perfect innocence, to lock the final gate. And we, the sisters, have begun to choose from the orphans. Elara stared at the words, cold rising through her body like ice water. The vigil. It wasn't a ceremony. It was an offering. She now understood why some girls were watched more than others, why the chants grew louder when certain names were whispered, why Maeve looked at her with such deep, unspoken sorrow. She wasn't a guest here, she was a candidate, and if she didn't run, she was going to be the next name the chapel swallowed. That night, the sky tore open, thunder cracked like the voice of something ancient waking from sleep. Rain slammed the roof in waves. The old stone groaned with every gust of wind. But inside, something deeper was breaking. The chants didn't begin as usual. They exploded, louder than ever, frantic, panicked, as if the nuns had skipped the ritual too many nights, and now they were trying to catch up all at once. The scraping from below wasn't rhythm anymore. It was violent, chaotic, the sound of something clawing its way upward, hungry. Then came the whispers, not from the floor, not from the walls, but from inside her mind, low coiling, calling her name over and over again like a lullaby sung by something that had never seen the sun. Suddenly, footsteps, sharp, purposeful. 2 nuns entered the dormitory. Their faces were pale, their eyes glazed like glass. "The Mother Superior wants you." One of them said, "It's time for the vigil." They didn't wait for her to respond. They grabbed her arms, dragged her down the corridor, past the chapel, toward the chained west wing. But then, the chapel doors burst open. It was Sister Mary, the old gardener, the only one who had ever spoken to Elara with anything like kindness. Her hands were shaking, but she held something heavy, an iron key, rusted. "Ancient, run, child," she shouted, her voice breaking through the storm. "This opens the outer gate. Take it, go. Let this cursed place fall." The other nuns lunged at her, their screams twisted with something inhuman, but Sister Mary held them back. Even as they dragged her to the floor, Elara didn't wait. She ran. She clutched the key in both hands as something behind her, something massive, broke free. A deep roar erupted from beneath the chapel, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in the world, and the ground beneath Nazareth began to crack. The wind outside screamed like it had seen what rose from the floor. Lightning split the sky over and over, flashing the halls in violent white. Elara ran faster than she thought her legs could carry her, her breath ragged. Her fingers clenched around the iron key so tight it cut into her skin. Behind her, the screams had changed. Not pain, not fear. Something worse. Worship. The chapel doors crashed open again, but not from nuns. From something crawling through the shadows. Something too large to walk, too angry to speak. The ground shook with every movement. Paintings fell from the walls, statues cracked, candles blew out in waves. One after the other, Elara reached the main hall. The front doors stood at the far end, tall, heavy locked since the day she arrived. She jammed the key into the rusted lock. It didn't fit. She turned it anyway. Behind her, the whispers came again, louder now, not calling her name, but speaking through it, like she was the doorway. Not the destination. The lock clicked. The doors groaned open. Wind blasted in, bringing rain, mud, dead leaves, freedom. But just as she stepped onto the threshold, something shifted behind her. A shadow. Vast, shifting, alive. It filled the hall, stretching along the walls like oil, shaped like a man, but crawling like a beast. Its voice wasn't a sound. It was a pressure, a memory, a promise. "You were meant for me," it said, not with words, but through her bones. "You were the key, the gate, the final lock." Elara screamed, pushed through the doors, and ran into the storm. The air outside was ice, the ground slick. She didn't look back, not when the asylum shook, not when its roof collapsed, not when a final shriek, ancient and endless, ripped through the sky and fell silent. She ran, until her legs gave out, until Nazareth was gone behind her, and the only sound left was the rain. Elara awoke in a field soaked with mud, her hands still wrapped around the iron key. The morning was gray, quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind, just a thick, unnatural stillness that wrapped around her like a burial cloth. She stood slowly, every muscle aching, her ears ringing with the echo of that final scream, the one that wasn't human, the one that still vibrated in her spine. She turned back, expecting to see smoke, fire, collapse. But the hill where Nazareth Asylum once stood was empty, not broken, not burning, just gone. The trees around it bent in strange directions. The grass flattened outward like something massive had risen and vanished into the sky. No walls, no stones, no bodies, only silence. Elara wandered through the woods, half-conscious, covered in scratches and dried blood that wasn't all hers. She was found near a road by a farmer. Days later, he said she looked like she had walked out of the grave. Eyes wide, mouth silent, hands clutching a rusted key and a leather book she wouldn't let go of. They asked her where she came from. She said Nazareth. The farmer looked confused. "There's no town called that," he told her. "Never has been, not around here. And as for the asylum, no one could find it. No records, no ruins, No evidence it had ever existed, only the story Elara told, and no one wanted to believe it, but they all agreed on one thing. Something about her eyes, something behind them, had seen something no child should ever survive. The official record said she was found near the edge of Green Hollow, malnourished, delirious, mumbling prayers in Latin. No one had taught her. She was taken in by a parish home miles away, given food, shelter, new clothes. But the staff whispered about her. They said the girl never slept through the night, that she kept salt under her pillow, that she refused to walk barefoot on wood floors. She spoke little, but when she did, it was never about what had happened. Not directly, just small things, things that made people uncomfortable, things like, don't pray too loudly, they can hear that. Or, the floor remembers the ones they take. At first, the sisters assumed she was traumatized, that she had escaped some terrible abuse, and maybe she had. But one nun, Sister Genevieve, wrote a letter she never sent. It was found years later in a locked drawer. She described waking in the night to find Elara standing in the chapel, barefoot, eyes closed, mouth whispering something in a language Genevieve didn't recognize. When she tried to approach, Elara turned to her and smiled, not with joy, not with warmth, but with understanding, like she remembered something Sister Genevieve had forgotten. The next day, Elara buried the journal in the garden behind the chapel, wrapped in waxed cloth. She never spoke of it again, but the plants grew faster there, and the soil stayed warm. Even in winter, Sister Genevieve left the parish a month later. She never explained why, but in her final note she wrote 7 words. They never sealed it. Not completely. Not forever. Years passed. Then decades. Elara vanished into obscurity. Her name forgotten by most. But the legend of Nazareth didn't die. It changed. It evolved. Locals began to tell stories. They said there was a hill outside Green Hollow where nothing grew, where compasses spun in circles, where animals refused to cross. They called it the Nun's Grave, or the Hollow Church, or just the Black Hill. Old farmers claimed they'd seen a pale girl wandering the tree line, always barefoot, always silent, carrying a book wrapped in waxed cloth. Children dared each other to spend the night there. None of them made it till dawn. One boy returned with a nosebleed that lasted 6 hours. Another stopped speaking entirely. The townspeople built fences, posted signs, private property, no trespassing, restricted land. But every few years, someone ignored them, a photographer, a journalist, a ghost hunter. None of them found the asylum, but some brought back strange things, unexplainable recordings, photos with shadows that didn't match the trees. One girl claimed she heard chanting under her feet. The legends grew louder when the town's church caught fire. No source, no survivors, only the altar left untouched. And coated in salt, an old woman who had once worked at the parish told a reporter, "It was never an orphanage, it was a seal, and we've forgotten what it was holding." Her name was never printed. She disappeared the day after the interview. Some say the hill is just cursed land. Others believe Elara was the last lock, and now that she's gone, the thing below is patient, waiting. In recent years, researchers tried to track down Nazareth Asylum. Not historians, not journalists, but people obsessed with what the church left out of the record. Digital archives, handwritten maps, old diocesan ledgers. Nothing matched. It was as if Nazareth had been erased deliberately, not just forgotten, scrubbed, sanitized, but every so often a fragment surfaced, a torn page in a private collection, a handwritten entry in a nun's personal diary. A ledger listing 35 children, with only 34 departures, and then came the photograph. A grainy black and white image, found behind a mirror in a Kentucky farmhouse, being demolished in 2006. It showed a chapel, half lit by candlelight, 12 nuns in front, one shadow behind them, too tall, too twisted to be human, and at the very center, a girl, not posing, not smiling, looking straight into the camera, eyes full of fire. The photograph was passed around online for years. No one could prove it was fake. No one could trace the location. But one man who studied it, a former seminary archivist, died in his sleep 2 days after sharing his notes. They found salt poured in a perfect circle around his bed, and his last message, scrawled in the margins of a prayer book, read, "The vigil is never over. It only moves." Now it's here. Elara's story doesn't end with escape. It lingers. In the shadows of small churches, in the cracked corners of parish schools, in the whispers of children who pray without knowing why. Not for comfort, but to keep the door shut. Some say Elara never left the asylum. Not completely. That when she crossed the threshold and vanished into the rain, something followed her out. Something clung to her like a second soul. Quiet, coiled, waiting. There are stories, not written, just spoken, of a woman seen in rural towns, thin, pale, moving from parish to parish, staying only a night, sleeping in basements, lighting candles backwards. She never speaks. She watches in one town. She was caught on church security footage, standing at the edge of the altar at 3 a.m, arms outstretched, mouth open, saying nothing. The footage corrupted itself minutes later. A priest who reviewed the tape went missing the next week. The only thing left in his apartment was a rosary and a copy of Sister Agnes's journal, one that no one remembered giving him. Another report. From a dying nun in Quebec, she said, a visitor came to her during the night. A young girl, eyes wide, skin damp from rain. She knelt beside the bed and whispered, "The gate still leaks. We have to keep praying." The nun died of cardiac arrest hours later, but wrote the word penitent 3 times on her bedsheet in her own blood. Whoever Elara is now, she isn't running anymore. She's watching, and everywhere she goes, things go quiet. Voices stop, doors stay locked, and the air always smells faintly of salt. What if the story isn't just about her? What if the thing that lived beneath Nazareth wasn't trapped by stone, but by belief? Not the kind that saves, the kind that obeys without asking, the kind that repeats prayers it doesn't understand. The penitent wasn't just summoned, it was fed, nourished by guilt, by discipline, by silence. And now, people everywhere are seeing things they can't explain. Chapel walls that bleed at midnight, children speaking backwards in their sleep, old church floors with dark patches that salt won't cleanse. In some towns, the bells ring by themselves 3 times, always 3. Always just before the sun rises. They say it's just wind or failing wiring. But survivors, the ones who've seen the shadows move, they say otherwise. They say it's the echo of the vigil, still circling the earth, looking for the next place to root itself. Every now and then, a new orphanage burns down. No cause, no suspects, just scorched earth. And one unmarked page left behind. It always says the same thing. The gate holds for now, but not for long. There are churches that have stopped opening at night, clergy who sleep surrounded by salt lines and open Bibles, entire convents that refuse to take in new children. They're afraid because they've heard the stories, and deep down, they know. The penitent doesn't need a chapel to return. It only needs faith. Faith twisted hard enough to become fear. Fear whispered often enough to become worship. And the more we remember, the closer it gets. The penitent doesn't return with thunder. It returns in silence. In the quiet closing of church doors no one remembers locking. In the hollow sound of bells ringing without hands. In the children who stop speaking after walking past old chapels. There have been reports, not in headlines, but in whispers. A monastery in northern Maine, sealed without explanation. A convent in southern France. Every nun vanished overnight, only a circle of blood and salt left behind on the chapel floor. Still warm when police arrived. No suspects, no trace, only a crucifix snapped in half, not broken, twisted. Those who investigate these places, they never publish, they never return. One priest, Father D'Angelo, he sent one final message to a seminary contact. 6 words, "It remembers me. I never forgot." His room was found drenched in wax, dozens of burned down candles. No source of fire, no burn marks on the floor, only the strong scent of metal, and scripture scratched into the walls in a child's handwriting. And yet, the church says nothing. No acknowledgement, no warnings, no closures. Only relocations, only silence. The archives remain sealed, the journals locked behind permissions. No one grants, and anyone who asks too many questions suddenly loses access. It's not just folklore anymore. It's containment policy. And Elara, wherever she is, may not be alone. Because whatever followed her out of that gate, it's no longer behind the walls. It's behind the eyes of those who still believe. And it's waking slowly, carefully, patiently. The return isn't a scream. It's a whisper you mistake for your own thought. And it's already begun. They say only one person ever saw it clearly, saw the penitent, and lived. His name doesn't matter. He never gave it in the letter, only a title, Warden of the Gate. The envelope was delivered to a Jesuit library in Rome. No return address, no stamps, just sealed in wax, pressed with a mark no one could identify. Inside, 12 handwritten pages, and one instruction scrawled on the back. Burn after reading, salt the ashes. But someone scanned it first. What it described shouldn't be real. He said he was born at Nazareth, not brought in. Born under the chapel floor, raised in the west wing, trained to hear it, speak to it, serve it. He said the penitent has no true form, that what you see is what it steals from your mind, a shape made of guilt, a voice that sounds like someone you failed. It only appears as what you fear, what you crave, what you regret. He said the nuns weren't its jailers, they were its clergy, and the rituals weren't for protection, they were for feeding, because the penitent doesn't want freedom, it wants worship, and if no one remembers it, it dies. But if even one child fears it, it wakes. The final paragraph was nearly illegible, written in shaking hand, ink smudged with blood or tears. It read, "I hear it again. It's calling through stone, through prayer, through time. It knows I broke the chain. It knows I told you, you must bury this, not in earth, in silence, because the more you know, the more it listens, and the more it listens, the closer it gets." Before she disappeared, Elara was seen one last time, not by accident, not in passing. She wanted to be found. It was 1903. A traveling friar stopped at a roadside chapel outside Illinois. Old stone, overgrown with moss, boarded shut since the war. But when he arrived, the doors were open. Candles lit the altar. Dozens of them, all burned low, wax running like blood across the stone, and in the center, Elara, still young, still wearing the same wool coat she'd been found in years earlier. No shoes, no voice, only silence. She looked at him, then knelt, and began to pray. Not Latin, not English, something older, words that didn't belong in any human throat. The friar said the room grew cold, his breath fogged, his vision blurred, and then he heard something behind the walls, something scraping, something pacing. Elara didn't flinch. She kept praying. Her hands steady, her eyes closed. The friar tried to stop her, but his legs gave out. He fell to his knees, weeping, choking, unable to move. And then it stopped. The sound, the cold, everything. She rose, walked past him, placed a single iron key on the altar, and whispered, "Not sealed, only sleeping." Then she vanished into the trees and was never seen again. The chapel burned to the ground that night. No lightning, no candles left burning, just ashes and salt, and one stone left behind, etched with 7 words. The vigil ends when the world forgets. It doesn't rise in the same place twice. It doesn't need to. The vigil moves, like a sickness, like a hymn you hum without knowing why. Researchers started noticing patterns, places of worship built on strange foundations. Chapel floor plans shaped like locks. Cathedrals aligned with magnetic dead zones. Every location, every building, had 3 things in common: an orphanage, a sudden fire, and silence from the church. One woman, a former Vatican surveyor, mapped them. 37 sites, across continents, across centuries, from the hills of Ireland to the ruins in Argentina, to an abandoned convent buried beneath the ice in northern Siberia. The same symbols repeated, always carved near the altar, always hidden beneath paint or plaster. Not crosses, not scripture, but circles within circles, and a spiral in the center. The spiral always turns inward. She said it wasn't design, it was ritual. The architecture itself was prayer, a kind of spatial cage. But she made a mistake. She published her findings. Briefly, before her research was pulled, her credentials revoked, her name vanished from every academic database, and her final email, leaked by a colleague, read only this: "It's not the buildings, it's not the prayers, it's us. We are the locks, and it knows how to turn us." The penitent doesn't knock. It doesn't crawl through cracks in walls. It enters through belief. You don't have to say its name, you just have to wonder. You hear a sound in your house. You pause before saying a prayer. You hesitate, and the silence stretches too long. That's how it finds the door. Because the real gate isn't under the chapel. It's inside you, in the places your mind avoids, in the questions you don't ask, in the guilt you carry from things you've long buried. It doesn't want worship. It wants attention. Even fear will do, especially fear, and once it knows you see it, even a little, it leaves a mark, not visible, not diagnosable, but felt. Sudden chills in sacred places, a dream where you kneel and don't know why, a song stuck in your head that sounds like Latin but isn't, and always, always, that whisper before sleep. Low, faint, inside your ear but behind your eyes. They are watching through the floor. Some try to fight it, salt their windows, pray until their voices break, sleep with holy water beneath the bed, but the penitent doesn't need to break through. It only needs to be invited by fear, because once fear becomes ritual, the vigil has already begun. And if you've listened this far, you already know. You think this is just a story, just words, just atmosphere. But stories are rituals too, and rituals are how it spreads. You're still watching, still listening, which means you're already participating. Do you remember how it begins? A child, an orphanage, a prayer that wasn't a prayer. That prayer is now in your ears, and it doesn't forget the ones who hear it. Look around your room right now. Notice the silence. Notice how the shadows don't fall exactly right. Notice how one part of the floor feels colder than the rest. It always starts with noticing. You heard about Elara. You imagined the chapel, you pictured the iron key, and that was enough. Because thought is form, and form is invitation. You didn't mean to kneel, but part of you already has. The part that wondered if it was real. The part that didn't want to believe, but listened anyway. The penitent doesn't demand faith, just attention. And you gave it. The vigil doesn't require a chapel anymore. It only requires a pattern. 3 things: a watcher, a whisper, and a silence that follows. You're already 2/3 of the way there. Not everyone who hears the story is marked, but some are. It's not random. It's not chosen. It's resonance. You hear a line, a sentence, and something inside you clicks or recoils. That's when it notices you. Some report dreams, repeating ones. Same hallway, same door, always locked, always, something breathing behind it. Others hear music, low chanting from behind walls or underneath beds, like the pipes are humming a liturgy only children can understand. One girl in 2012 said her mirror whispered her name every night at 3:09 a.m. When her parents took it down, they found the words, "I am beneath," etched into the wall behind it. It's never loud, never violent. Until it is, it studies first, like it did at Nazareth. It waits for routine, waits for the right soul, not the weakest, not the strongest, but the cleanest. It doesn't just feed on innocence. It nests in it, and once it enters, people don't scream. They pray harder, because part of them believes it's holy. Part of them thinks the dread is divine. That's how it spreads. Through the holy, through the pure. That's why it's still here. Why the vigil hasn't ended. Because people keep listening, and people keep believing, even when they shouldn't. Especially when they shouldn't. Nazareth wasn't unique. It was a prototype, a blueprint for how to build a gate. Not to keep something out, but to keep something in. The chapel, the stone, the prayers, the orphans, all parts of a machine. The children weren't saved. They were scanned, measured, offered. The nuns weren't protectors. They were gears. Turning, until one day, the wrong gear jammed. That was Elara. She wasn't the sacrifice. She was the fracture. The prayer that wasn't completed. The soul that said no. And the machine broke. But machines can be rebuilt anywhere. The vigil doesn't need stone walls now. It uses stories, screens, voices, even this video. If you've made it this far, you've already traced the shape. You know the sound of salt on stone. You've seen the key in your mind. You've heard the whispers in silence. And once the image forms, the vigil resumes. The pattern doesn't need permission, just repetition. You see a cracked chapel, you feel the cold spot in your house. You check your watch at 3:09 a.m. You say, it's just coincidence, but you know better now. Nazareth was never buried, it was just renamed. In 2021, a restoration team in Rome was tasked with digitizing sealed Vatican documents. They weren't supposed to read, only scan, label store. But one folder had no label, no date, just a single word burned into the leather. Vigilia inside. A thin book, handwritten in 5 languages, bound in skin, pages brittle with age and heat. No author. But the first page read, Nazareth failed. Containment is fractured. The host escaped with a name. There were diagrams, floor plans identical to the chapel where Elara prayed, but mirrored, inverted, as if the design had been reversed. They matched churches on 3 continents, all recently burned, all with no survivors. And at the center of each design, a name Elara, not a victim, not a witness, a variable, a failure the penitent couldn't consume. And because it couldn't, it changed. The book described a shift in behavior, less brute force, more subtle infection, through ritual, through faith, through memory. And on the final page, there was a sketch, not of a demon, not of a beast, but of a girl, kneeling, smiling, holding an iron key. Beneath it, 6 words. She carries the gate inside her. What if it was never about stone, never about salt, never about sacred ground? What if the true gate was always the soul, not the broken ones, not the damned, but the untouched, the clean, the devout, the ones who still believed in protection? Because those are the ones it enters, gently, patiently, through ritual, and once inside, it doesn't take over. It waits. Waits for a moment of weakness, a skipped prayer, a guilty thought, a whispered doubt. That's the click of the lock. The vigil isn't to keep it out, it's to keep it still, sleeping silent. But when you cry out in despair, when you pray and mean it, when your faith is raw and desperate and real, that's when it stirs. Because purity, real purity, isn't a shield, it's a scent, and the penitent follows it like blood in water. Elara wasn't possessed. She was chosen because she survived. She became a vessel the thing couldn't consume. So it changed, learned her shape, copied her silence, followed her shadow. And now it's learning again. Through you, every listener, every dreamer, every child who kneels without knowing why. They're all potential gates, and most won't even know until it's too late. In 2024, a cryptographer working on religious manuscripts noticed something strange. She wasn't decoding language. She was mapping structure, patterns in speech, cadence, repetition. She fed over 100 Vigil-related texts into her system, sermons, diaries, prayer books, and this script, the one you're hearing now, what came out wasn't a translation. It was a symbol, a spiral, nested inside a lock, surrounded by circles of text. In perfect symmetry, like a sigil, built from words, a prayer disguised as a story. It didn't matter the language, the spiral always emerged. She shared it with 3 colleagues. Within a week, all 4 stopped responding. One sent a final message at 3:09 a.m., a corrupted audio clip, 17 seconds of whispering, 16 in Latin. One in a girl's voice. It's watching through your screen. After that, her device bricked itself, physically melted, plastic warped, battery ruptured without cause. The lab shut down the project, files deleted, system wiped. But the symbol had already spread, downloaded, saved, screen captured by thousands. And just like the journals, the diagrams, the floor plans, the more people saw it, the stronger it got. Because the vigil isn't just ancient, it's adaptive. Every new version of the story, every retelling, every share, is another lock breaking. The signs are no longer subtle, they're multiplying. Chalk circles found in schoolyards, children humming songs no one taught them, statues in chapels turning to face the wall overnight, emergency exorcisms on the rise. But no one's talking about it. Not openly, not officially. Priests disappearing mid-sermon, convents going silent. Entire towns claiming technical issues during mass live streams. One monastery in Austria collapsed in on itself. No earthquake, no weather, just a sound, like thunder without clouds. And then the earth swallowed it whole. Survivors said they heard bells as they ran. Not church bells, not metal, but bones. The ritual, whatever it was, is failing. Too many people know. Too many locks have cracked. Too many children have dreamed of places they've never seen. And in those dreams, there's always a chapel, always a voice, always a key. The church is retreating. Archives sealed, doors bolted. Whispers of a new rite, something desperate, something final. But they're too late, because the vigil only worked when it was forgotten. And now we remember. The penitent is no longer sealed, no longer sleeping. It's moving, from prayer to pulse, from silence to screen. And its voice is getting louder, not in the earth, but in us. The final sign is always the same. The candles won't stay lit. Every chapel that held the vigil reported it before the end. The wicks burn cold, the flames vanish without smoke, and the silence that follows is not empty, it's listening. You can feel it now, can't you? Not fear, not chills, but that pressure behind the eyes, that flicker at the edge of your vision, like something is watching, waiting, measuring, because you've heard it all. You know the prayers, the names, the rules. You've traced the spiral with your mind. You've opened the story with your voice, and that means the door is no longer sealed. There's one truth the nuns never wrote down, because they were too afraid to admit it. The vigil was never meant to last forever. It was a delay, a stall, a gamble. And now the century has passed. The last of the salt has faded. The old stones have cracked, and the watchers have grown quiet. But something else hasn't, something that remembers. The prayers, the hunger, the taste of innocence. And it's looking for the one who escaped, the girl with the fire in her voice, the one who ran, but never really left, the one who still walks. In the places we've forgotten, Elara. They say Elara still holds the key, not in her hand, not around her neck, but in her memory. The thing beneath Nazareth couldn't consume her, so it did the next best thing. It followed, and she knew it. That's why she kept moving, why no one ever saw her twice, why every place she stayed went cold after. She wasn't running. She was leading it, keeping it from rooting, keeping it from choosing a new gate. But even Elara is only human, and time breaks all things. If she's gone, if she's fallen, then the key is loose, and the penitent has no more leash, only direction toward the ones who know, the ones who watched, the ones who listened too closely, toward you. Because now you don't just know the story, you've carried it, imagined it, felt it shift beneath your floorboards, and that means you're part of it. The vigil is over, the lock has turned, the last candle has gone out. If you feel watched tonight, don't pray out loud, don't move, and whatever you do, don't listen for footsteps, because if you hear them, it's already inside. And it only ever wanted one thing, to be remembered. Deep in the Vatican's disaster archive, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and dust, there's a file nobody claims, no title, no subject line, no author, just an old folder, marked with a faded wax seal, pressed with a spiral that matches no order, no sect. Inside is a single black and white photograph, a burned chapel, a hole where the altar should be, and something lying in the ash, an iron key, half melted, still warm when the image was taken. There's also a page, part ledger, part confession, no names, no signatures, only a phrase in shaking Latin at the top, Continetur in recordación. It is contained by remembrance, and in the margins, different ink, older script, 6 words, etched in desperation. Do not archive, do not translate, do not speak, but someone did. Someone always does. And that's how the vigil begins again. You've heard the story, you followed it. You opened the gate with every word. But now comes the part most forget. The part after the final prayer, after the final scream, the silence. Because the penitent doesn't celebrate, it waits for you to dismiss it, to call it fiction, to click away, to forget. That's when it lingers, not in shadow, but in ritual, in every time you retell this, in every time you remember her name, because names are keys too. And now, you know Elara. You saw the chapel. You smelled the salt. You felt the cold breath before the scream. That's enough. You're part of the vigil now, not in a convent, not in a file, but in the hush between heartbeats, where it waits to be remembered again. So tonight, when you kneel beside your bed, if you still do, listen before you speak. If the silence feels too loud, if your thoughts echo like footsteps, if the floor beneath you creaks without reason, don't pray out loud. Just hold your breath. And remember this, the penitent feeds on purity, but it lives on belief, and belief is what brought you here.